Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel, Mass Transit. That's the subject of the today. And today we're going to talk about job consumers. It's been, I don't think I've done a video on job consumers since version 7 first came out, so it's been a good year and a half. So I thought it was a good time to go through and kind of refresh this stuff. So there is a sample out there and it's linked in the description. You're welcome to pull that down and read along. I recently updated it to .NET 6 and all the latest bits. And you can get that out there, and like I said, it'll be linked. Otherwise, just general updates before we kind of jump into it. Many people know that I've worked for, the same company for 24 years. As of a couple of weeks ago, that engagement has ended. And now I am focusing 100% of my time working on mass transit. And just getting started, things are kind of coming up. We've got the different organizations set up. One of the things I wanted to call out, and a lot of people have asked before, consulting opportunities and then support engagements for companies that want to get support for mass transit. So there is a new tab on the website. It's called Support. It's linked down here on the left bar. It kind of details some of the services that are available and how to get in touch to get a quote and get set up on that. So there's a couple of different options on there, different support services, what capabilities are out there, in addition to like just, hey, I'm new to messaging and I want to understand if I'm using mass transit correctly, or hey, we're stuck on a issue and we can't really figure it out. And those can be set up as either, annual contracts, and in the case of some places, we'll do some just kind of pay-as-you-go consulting type solutions. So check that tab out, hit the email if you want any questions on that. Now let's jump into it. Mass transit has an ability called job consumers, and you can find those in the documentation. They're talked about. The different interface where you can specify, instead of a message, it's actually just a job type, which, hey, big shock, it's just a message. But the intent is to deal with this consumer differently. Typically, you're going to use a job consumer when you need to spend more time than just a minute or two. Consumers are generally pretty fast. But when you get into the minutes or even 20 minutes, that's where you'd want to jump into a job consumer, because what it does is it takes the load off the broker of keeping an absolute connection and puts it into the job consumer that's actually running outside of an actual message. Just deals with, network timeouts better, things like that. The documentation is in there, but we're just going to jump into the sample and kind of see what we have here. So in the job consumer sample, what I have is I have a simple job consumer, and this is an iJob consumer. We're going to convert a video, which is pretty simple. I mean, I throw a bunch of other stuff in here just to be friendly, but the main intent is that I'm just going to set up a random amount of time, and in this case, I think 30 seconds is the max, and I'm just going to convert the video, delay, and then publish a video converted event, and be done. Simple case as that. Nothing super complex here. To submit the jobs, I've actually created a controller, convert video controller, and I put a number of methods in this, and I wanted to kind of show this out. This is just an ASP.NET API controller application. The very simplest one that I have is I have an HTTP post where I post just the path of a video to convert, and I take in the request client for convert video. I do a get response of job submission accepted. I submit that video, and then I return OK with the job ID that I get back from the response. This requires the job services to be up and running, so the consumer to accept the job, write the job out, get the Saga thing, do the response. Perfectly example if people want to get that job ID. Another example I have on here is the fire and forget submit job controller action. And what this does is it just calls publish, and it just publishes a submit job of convert video. In this case, I'm creating the job ID up front. And I'm going to publish that out and just return great. Fine, I don't care. Nothing I need to see here. And we can see those running. If I go into Postman, I can submit a job by request. And in this case, I'm just telling it to drop a timestamp in for the file name. And you can see I get that job ID back. And if we go and look, messages are processing in the background, job attempts are started. All of that's running in the background. I can also just do the fire and forget. It comes back, 9 milliseconds versus, I don't know, how long did this one take? 11. Yeah, we're talking about trivial amounts of time. And I can now, one of the new features that was released in a fairly current version of Mass Transit is the ability to get the job state. So I put another controller action in here to get the job state. And I can see that that job that I just submitted has already completed. So inside the controller, I also have a get job state, which uses the request client with get job state, and it will take that job ID, call, produce that message out. The Saga that tracks the jobs will process that, return back any of the current state information that came back from that job. And as you can see, it's completed, the state is that, so on and so forth. Let's try to get another one of these and see if I can get there before it's completed. You never know, I'm not that fast. Okay, so this one is currently in the started state, so it is out there running. I can continue to hammer that and say, oh yeah, it's still started, it's still started. It'll likely complete eventually, you know, okay, look, now it's completed. So, and in this gives us the ability now to actually ask if a job has completed. So some new capabilities in there. In this particular example, I'm using RabbitMQ locally, and I'm using Entity Framework to store the job sagas. So if we look in the configuration of this service, I'm adding my DB context, in which in this case I have my migration set up, and I'm using Postgres locally. I have a Docker Compose in the project that sets all this up. I have a migrations hosted service, which is just my easy way of saying, hey, when we start up this process, let's make sure we're on the latest version of the database, apply any pending migrations to that database before we start up. And it does this as a hosted service. I don't know if a lot of people know this, but the difference between a hosted service and a background service just starts and runs and doesn't block startup. A hosted service, if you block and start, it blocks startup. So this will run before it runs any subsequent hosted services. So when you're registering hosted services, order matters in the container because it will run them in order. Super useful stuff. I do this before I add MassTransit because I want it to do the migrations before I start the bus. And in this case, I'm just adding those two consumers. I'm setting up existing Saga repositories using Postgres for the job service Saga DB context. And there's 3 Saga types: job Saga, job type Saga, and the job attempt Saga. Then I'm firing up RabbitMQ. I'm doing the service instance to config. In this case, I have the configure job service endpoints. When you're deploying job services, if you're going to be fanning out a lot of pods for running the jobs, you can split the configure job service endpoints and the configure job service into 2 separate parts. And the reason I would say you would want to do this is because if you're going to run your jobs, put those on a pod that's only doing configure job service, and then put the job service endpoints on a single exactly once pod just to eliminate concurrency errors. I mean, Kubernetes is going to make sure that you're keeping one pod running all the time to service the jobs, so you're not going to miss anything, you know, as we're worrying about like n+1. We're kind of over that. And these don't have to be up to accept jobs on the queue. So as long as the consumer endpoints are running on the pods, they will accept the job. It's just the state machines have to be running to do the dispatch. So that just eases up some scheduling pains, something to think about there. Beyond that, I set finalize completed as false because for demo purposes, I wanted to keep the completed jobs around. Normally, if you set that to true, it will clean out completed jobs and only keep faulted ones, which faulted jobs, I will point out, there is now also a retry job command where you can do a retry job with a job ID. And if that job is in a faulted state, it will retry that. There's also a cancel job. So a couple of new commands that are out there. In this case, I'm configuring the endpoints so that the convert video job consumer is within that service instance. I just configure the rest of the remaining consumers out here, which would be that track video, which just keeps track of things that are done and writes out log messages. Nothing super exciting to see there. It's just making sure that ordering and grouping and all that stuff works. Yeah, so there are a few other things here, like the MassTransit host options. I tell it to wait until the bus is started before the APIs start. I have some start timeouts in here. Interesting thing when shutting down, the host options, which is part of the generic host on .NET, you can actually set the shutdown timeout. So if you increase the stop timeout of MassTransit, but don't change this value, the host will actually kill itself anyway while MassTransit's trying to shut down, which could leave messages in flight. So just a nice thing to think about there if you're going to bump that value up. Beyond that, this is all pretty basic stuff. I do have the health check endpoints on here, which I'm pretty sure I've demoed many times, but if I look at localhost :5000 / I think it's health ready. I can see that the JSON written out there is all the different endpoints. The bus is ready, everything is ready, track video converted, all that stuff is ready. That's entirely configured. You can now just create an inline method called healthresult.toJSON string. And MassTransit actually has an extension method that makes this look like the pretty JSON, so you can see all the endpoints and the health status. So hopefully that's cool. Like I said, the job consumer is updated. These are super useful. Yeah, I mean, people use these a lot, typically to run long-running consumers, especially in decoupled scenarios. So yeah, questions? Definitely hit up the Discord. The Discord is always happening. Yeah. Thanks for joining. Bye.